Today on the Humanistic Resources Show, we're going to talk about empowering dyslexic employees. You're not going to want to miss this one. Welcome to the Humanistic Resources Show. I am Denise O'Malley, your host and the founder of You Define Wellness. I'm delighted that you are here with us today. I have a son who is an adult son who is dyslexic, and I know the challenges that he faces every single day on his job. And he's not, okay, I happen to think he's unique. I'm his mom. But you know what? He's really not all that unique in terms of there are millions and millions and millions of adults who are dyslexic, many of whom have never been diagnosed as such. They just have learning disorders and they know it, and they don't know how to cope and adjust. And we want to help empower them. So I have with me an expert on dyslexia, and I'm going to bring up to the stage now Shae Wissell, who is the owner, founder, director, genius behind an organization called Rethink Dyslexia. Shae, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
You know, I know it's the wee hours of the morning for you, so you get extra points for being here. I certainly appreciate it. You are you are in Australia, so it's 3 o'clock in the morning for you, so we do appreciate you definitely being here. You and I met a couple of months ago, I think it was, and when you started talking about dyslexic employees and empowering them and the need out there for supporting dyslexic employees, I just was all over it. I knew I needed to have you on the show. How big of an issue is dyslexia with adults out there?
Well, in Australia, we say it's around 1 in 10. I think in the US, they're saying it's 1 in 5. So the numbers do vary around the world, but it's generally 1 in 10 the stats that we work with. And it is a really big issue because there's really a significant lack of awareness and understanding around dyslexia, particularly in your adulthood, which is why I work in this space at 3 o'clock in the morning, because we really need to be raising awareness and addressing some of the challenges that we face in the workplace.
Let's understand dyslexia, first of all. How do you define it?
So dyslexia technically is under the DSM-5, so it's the Diagnostic Manual for Psychology and Psychiatry, and it's classified as a specific learning difficulty or disorder. In Australia, it's under the Discrimination Act as a specific learning disability. Mm-hmm. So again, in each country, there's different terminology used. In the US, it's learning disability. In the UK, it's specific learning impairment. And for us, the specific learning disability in Australia, it's dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, and dyspraxia. So the areas where we can have difficulty with reading, writing, and maths all sit under that umbrella.
Okay. So somebody who has dyslexia and is an employee of a company, whether or not it's diagnosed, what challenges do they face in their job?
Well, there could be a variety of issues that it could present as. So generally, when we think of dyslexia, it's a reading disorder or difficulty, but it's so much more than that. So someone with dyslexia will have challenges with their reading fluency, their reading speed, and their reading comprehension. But what we also know is then that translate into spelling and writing difficulties as well. Someone might take longer to write an email. It might take them longer to draft it and then read it back to themselves and edit it. They may appear disorganized, or they might be working harder than their peers to keep up. So they might be working longer hours. So you might notice that, or you might notice that there's might appear sloppy mistakes in someone's work. And they might be a lot more articulate, but when they're putting their concepts on paper, they're not as good. And so there's a mismatch in expectations between the manager and the employee with dyslexia, because they can do some things really well and then they struggle in other areas. And we'd call that a spiky profile, where it goes up and down. With someone that doesn't have dyslexia, normally their profile will generally be on a straight line when they're doing different tasks.
So it can really empower or impede their ability to get raises, get higher level positions, things like that.
Yeah, for some people it can really be a block because a lot of the times the research I've done and overseas demonstrates that people with dyslexia are really fearful of disclosing that they've got a learning difficulty. And so when I work with companies, we're really looking at kind of three types of personas in the workplace. You've got someone who's dyslexic that's happy to talk about it, like myself.
Mm-hmm.
Then you've got the dyslexic who's really masking and hiding their difficulties, and they really don't want anybody to know because they're fearful of shame or discrimination, or they're embarrassed. And then you've got the dyslexic person who hasn't had the opportunity to be diagnosed, and so they think there's something wrong, or they know they're struggling, but they're not sure why. So there's two really complex types of people in the work environment that aren't getting the right support at the moment. And so that really can impact on their ability to progress in their career. Or they may have all the right skills and strategies in place to support themselves without having to disclose. And then a new manager might come in, or they might get the opportunity to step up, and those strategies then fall away. Or you've got the person like myself who does disclose, and then their manager employer is conscious, or they're thinking that they don't want to put them forward for another role because they don't think they can do it. So there can be a lot of barriers for us progressing, and my research indicates that around 34 to 40% of people are underemployed. So they might be really highly qualified, but they're not able to work within that space because of their dyslexic difficulties.
I know you have a little bit of a presentation here. Before we jump over to it, I'd really like to understand, why did you get into this line of work? What was the passion that drove you to it? Easy for me to say.
Well, I was diagnosed at 27 with dyslexia and dysgraphia, so writing difficulties and reading. And when I was diagnosed, I had my first and hopefully only ever mental health breakdown, really. So I became suicidal, and I was in and out of hospital for a little while, quite unwell. And it was really my mum and my family that helped me get through that really dark time for me. And part of being diagnosed as an adult, I felt that I'd really been let down by the education system. I'd already gone through university and had a degree by that time. So I was a speech pathologist. And I was just really angry and felt a lot of shame because I felt like I'd lost my identity, and I didn't know who I was really in the world anymore as an adult. I was going through a divorce, so I was married young and divorced young. So there was a lot of complex issues happening for me at the time. And this for me was kind of the icing on the cake. And I just, I couldn't cope, really. Mm-hmm. And each time I disclosed in the workplace, I'd be faced with some type of discrimination. I wouldn't be offered the salary that they'd promoted in an ad because I'd asked for some support. I was bullied by managers. I was told I was cheating because I had peers supporting me with my writing. So all these things that constantly were coming up for me, and I ended up being terminated from a job because of my dyslexia in the probationary period. And in Australia, we've got a 6-month probationary period, and you can be terminated for any reason, and there's nothing you can do about it, even if it's discrimination with a disability. And so I was living in the country at the time, and I was driving back and forth from Melbourne, and someone in America actually was doing podcasts talking about dyslexia. And I thought, well, we don't have anything in Australia that really shares the adult's voice and the adult story. And so I started with podcasts, with the Dear Dyslexic podcast series, and then I grew into a national charity. And recently that charity has been separated into the business I have now. And we really work around supporting young people and adults, because we find when we leave school, all that support stops. And as we transition into adulthood, we get a lot of support from family, and that slowly drops off as well because we become independent adults. And so then we're looking for a new network that will help support us in the workplace and in our personal lives as we manage. And for me, it's really important that we have that ongoing support, because dyslexics face significant mental health challenges that we bring from our childhood into adulthood. And so what we're trying to do is reduce those challenges and support ourselves so that we can succeed in the workplace and in whatever we're wanting to do in life.
How are you spreading your message globally now?
Well, we're starting in the US, but really the podcasts were our starting point. So there's nearly 40,000 downloads. They're listened to worldwide. And social media has been amazing because I would never have had the reach I have if I hadn't been for social media. And when I started, I wasn't even on social media. I hated it because I can't spell, and I was so fearful of and I still don't spell. And now my mum passed away last year, and she used to call me and say, Shae, your posts are out. I'd be like, but mum, it's my authentic self. She's like, no, business, always have the correct spelling. And now our friends message me and say, oh, there's a few spelling mistakes. But I do a lot of presentations internationally now, particularly with my research, and having quite a lot of conversations in the US as well around how we can better support employees and adults as well. So we are slowly spreading our message. I've been in this space now, this is my 8th year, and I'm just about to become a doctor. I've submitted my thesis, and it really is all around this space of how we support adults, because there's not enough research from an Australian perspective out there at the moment.
Awesome. Now you have some information you want to share with us. Do you want to go ahead and bring that up?
Yeah. We've actually touched on a lot, but I might just show if I can get this one to work. So I just mentioned really who we are and my story around how I got to where I am today. Some of the services we offer are around coaching and consulting and that workplace training and learning and development. And then we've got our podcasts, like I mentioned, and we release one a month of those. And we've just released a second series called The Hobo CEO that's really supporting neurodivergent business owners as well, because it can be quite isolating as a business owner and being neurodivergent. We've touched a bit on what dyslexia is, but I think one of the important things is that, as I was talking about dyslexia in the workplace, even though we have challenges with reading, writing and spelling, what some people might not know is that we have some difficulties in some other areas. So motor control, so we might have challenges with our handwriting. And so when you're asking someone who's dyslexic to get up on a whiteboard and write in front of people, you might notice that it's illegible or you can't quite understand what they're trying to say. We generally have short-term memory difficulties as well. So if you're giving someone in the workplace more than one instruction, they may start to struggle with those instructions. And generally anything after 3 instructions will become challenging for us as well. So it might be recalling numbers, names. If you're asking someone to take minutes in a meeting, that can be really challenging for someone who's dyslexic, because they're trying to listen, write, make sure they're spelling correctly, and it can be really challenging then to participate in a meeting and take those minutes. We can also struggle with background noise. So even though it is 3 o'clock in the morning here, it's really, really quiet and everyone's in bed. And so for me, that's really helpful, because I struggle if like the TV's on and we've got ads in the background. I struggle to have a conversation with my husband. I can't focus on just one thing, or in the car with the radio on. As a young person, I loved it, but now as I get older, I just can't cope with that noise if I'm trying to concentrate on driving. And then the one that I really love the most, spatial temporal challenges. So getting our lefts and rights confused, especially when we're driving, can be very frustrating for the passenger, but also for ourselves, because I generally always say the wrong way to go in the car, but also getting lost really easily as well. So thanks to Google Maps now, we can get around much, much easier. But even still, because of pin drops, it might be on the opposite side of the street. So I always have to allow a lot more time to get somewhere, because I know I'm going to get lost and it's going to take me extra time. So if you think of all these different challenges that someone might have in the workplace, you can start to see there's quite a complex layering of difficulties. It's not just purely that reading that people can assume, or the letters moving on the page or being back to front. We also know that it's on a spectrum like other learning difficulties or neurodevelopmental disorders. So someone with dyslexia might be really good at some things and they might be really bad at other things. And this can be dependent on how much intervention we might have had as a child. Like I've had no intervention. And our education level as well can impact on the severity of our dyslexia. We also know that it's most often genetic. So my family, my dad is definitely dyslexic, even though he hasn't been diagnosed. We know it comes from him. And then one of my brothers and some of my nephews as well. So it's highly genetic. It's not just favoured to boys. It's just that we've got more boys in our family than girls. But my daughter, who's 2.5, is up to 66% more likely to inherit dyslexia. So that's quite a big factor when we're thinking about our children or our colleagues. Generally, we might not think we know anyone that's dyslexic, but we know with the prevalence rate so high, we do know someone in our community, in our workplace, in our family that could possibly have it. And when we're looking at our families, it's how do we support them as a whole, because there's most likely more than one person that's got dyslexia in the family. And then what we tend to see is this overlap of other co-occurring difficulties. So ADHD, autism, I've mentioned dysgraphia and dyscalculia. Dyspraxia is also known as developmental coordination disorder in the UK, and then speech and language disorders. So these are just some of them, but these are the most common ones that you'd see someone with dyslexia having. So you'd see up to 80% of people with dyslexia have dyscalculia, so really that day-to-day financial literacy difficulties. I would have thought that I had it because my maths is terrible, but I don't. I do have dysgraphia though. And you'll see quite a lot of people having ADHD and dyslexia as well. And about 14% of people with autism will also have dyslexia. But what we find is that someone who's neurodivergent will generally have a leading difficulty that they have. And then these ones are ones that don't impact them as much, or they may not have had the opportunity to get a diagnosis around these other ones. I don't know what it's like in America, but in Australia, it's really expensive and it's cost prohibitive to get some of these assessments. And so there's long wait lists and can be up to $2,500 just for a dyslexic assessment. And then autism one, you need multiple specialists. So it's even more expensive. And that's one of the reasons why we're seeing children not get diagnosed, and we're seeing a lot of young people and adults that not had the access to a diagnosis because of these financial barriers that are put in place. And so for me, for the last 6 years, I've been doing research into this space. And part of it was looking at the mental health and well-being of young people and adults in Australia, and then their workplace experiences. And so what we've found is that those with dyslexia have challenges across the employment life cycle, as we started to touch on before. So when I started my research, we were really just looking at kind of the retention section. We weren't really thinking about all the other areas that someone might be struggling with when they're going through the employment process. But what we've found from recruitment through to career progression or separation, there are multiple barriers that someone with dyslexia could face. And even just from the way that job ads are presented, pre-testing, I'm not sure what it's like in America, but we have a lot of pre-assessments for some roles, so psych testing. And so these can all be complex barriers where someone is either too fearful to disclose, or they're not enabled the tools they need during the recruitment process to show that they're on an even playing field with other candidates. And so then organisations are missing a huge talent pool here just in their recruitment process. Once people they actually get employed into a role, what we found is that the onboarding process, there's a lot of paperwork. So people are having to read contracts, they're doing e-learning courses to learn policies and procedures, those types of things. But a lot of dyslexics won't even read the contracts they're signing because it's just too content heavy. So this is an organisational risk at the very beginning because someone's not understanding what they've signed off on. And so this can be challenging for the dyslexic employee, and then, as I said, a risk for the organisation. Then we get into retention and development. And if someone hasn't disclosed, then what we found in my research was there were high levels of job stress and then job burnout because they weren't disclosing, and then they weren't being they're not accessing the reasonable adjustments that they're legally entitled to because of their dyslexia. And sometimes these adjustments can be just teaching someone how to use Microsoft Office. I mean, a lot of people don't even know how to use Immersive Reader, and that it can change the color of the background for you, that you can have text to speech on it. It can dictate now. Like Microsoft's done some amazing things. And there's a lot of other tools that can be low cost. and sometimes that are really valuable for all your staff. And so when we go to talk with companies, it's around how can we implement universal design principles where everyone gets the opportunity to have access to these types of workplace accommodations, whether it's flexible working arrangements, types of tech. ChatGTP now is my best friend and I absolutely love it. So there's lots of different resources that can be beneficial for everyone that we can put in to support dyslexics. And then what we also found is that a lot of people were either being performance managed out because they hadn't disclosed they were dyslexic, or they were leaving because they just didn't feel it was psychologically safe to talk about their difficulties in the workplace. And that's the last thing we want in organisations. It's really costly to performance manage someone out of an organisation. It takes so much time and it's really stressful for the person who's performance managing that person and for the dyslexic employee because they're having to mask and they don't feel it's safe. And we don't want anyone in the workplace not feeling that it's safe to talk about the difficulties that they're having.
We have a question that has come up that I'm going to go ahead and put on the screen. And that is Natalie has said, I have found that most people with dyslexia don't want to admit their diagnosis to not be labeled as sick or less than others. Is there a way to change that stigma?
Thanks, Natalie, for joining and for that question. What I've found is because there's such a significant lack of awareness of dyslexia globally, even though we're the highest prevalence rates and we're the biggest neurodivergent population, that a lot of my work over the 7 years has just been raising that awareness piece within organisations and within Australia and overseas as well. Because what we need to do is make workplaces psychologically safe for everyone to talk about their difficulties. And I don't know what it's like in the US, but we've just had some laws brought in where psychosocial hazards now have to be mitigated. And that's where someone's not feeling safe to talk about their difficulties, where they could be at risk of job burnout. And I think that this legislation is going to be one step in helping workplaces start to address these issues. But I think it comes down to workplace culture and how we want to set our values and what we want from our team members. And IBM in the US is doing some great work around neurodivergence, and they have a Slack channel where neurodivergent staff can join. They do a number of different activities that make someone feel welcome and accepted from the beginning. And I think if we're looking at the recruitment life cycle, if we're starting from our attraction and our recruitment around helping people feel safe to disclose and to talk about it, then we're more likely to then be able to support them along that employment life cycle and hopefully either promote them or they leave in a really positive way.
Awesome. This is a good place to take a quick 1.5 minute break. We'll be right back. Get ready to step up your employee wellness game with Dimensions, an employee wellness benefit plan proudly brought to you by the amazing team at You Define Wellness. Say goodbye to the dull and ordinary menu of employee wellness options because we're breaking free from that one-size-fits-all nonsense and giving employees a wellness plan that's as unique as their fingerprints. With education about different paths to well-being, setting a game plan with accountability and support, and helping employees select vetted professionals from our network representing over 130 well-being modalities. But hey, we've got something extra special for you. No more paying for benefits employees won't use with our return of unused services policy. No one else does this. Ready to level up your company's wellness game? Here's the deal. Click that snazzy QR code on your screen and let's get talking about the benefit plan employees will actually thank you for. So don't wait another second. Let's up-level your wellness goals and create a culture where everyone thrives. With Dimensions, an employee wellness benefit plan by You Define Wellness, we help employees discover new dimensions in their lives. All right, we're back. Before the break, we were talking about stigma in the workplace. How can, you may have other slides, so I apologize for jumping around on this. Where does an employer start in terms of identifying, is there a problem here that we need to address? Or Are there some mechanisms we need to put in place for additional support? Unless it's a problem in their face today, they're not listening, right? So where would an employer start?
Well, I think we're really seeing this amazing cultural shift globally around inclusion, diversity, and equity, equality. I always get the letters all mixed up, but it's, we're seeing it globally, this change around how we are more inclusive in the workplace. And so that's really exciting, because I think it's a really exciting time for me with my research coming out to demonstrate how we can start supporting workplaces. And I think when we work with organisations, a lot of times they say, oh, we don't have anyone that's dyslexic. And we say, well, that's statistically not possible based on your employee size. You've definitely got them. And so we look at how we can do different types of surveys, looking at reviewing policies and procedures to see where we might be able to adjust so someone with dyslexia might feel safe, trying to find a champion, someone who wants to talk about dyslexia, participating in different awareness raising activities like Dyslexic Awareness Month, so that people can start to come out. And a lot of times we're seeing inclusion and diversity committees set up. I know in Australia we've got a lot within organisations now. And what we're still finding is dyslexics don't have that voice. They're not sitting at the table. So we've got autistic people, people with ADHD, but we don't have dyslexics. And I think we have to start having the conversations around what are we doing around inclusion and diversity, and what does that look like in our organisation? And it's not just cultural diversity or ensuring we've got enough women in the workplace or being accepting of LGBTQI. Plus, it's around other labels, unfortunately, or other cohorts in our organisation that might need some support. And if we start talking about dyslexia and talking about neurodiversity and divergence in the broader sense, where there's a variety of different neurodevelopmental conditions that sit under it, then people are going to start to feel safe to come out. And then organisations can start to say, actually, we do have these people, because statistically we know we do.
Yeah.
It's how do we draw them out? And sometimes, what I find is we really need leaders at the top who are dyslexic to come out. What we're not seeing, we're seeing a lot of fantastic work made by Dyslexia in the UK with a lot of famous people. But I think what we're missing is the everyday people coming forward, particularly in workplaces, to say, actually, this is me and I'm doing an amazing job. These are the strategies I use, because then it's providing peer support and modelling. Mm-hmm. But we're missing that at the moment. And it's really because of that question around the stigma and discrimination that we're facing.
Yeah. I think this is a good transition to your next slide. If you can address this, what does this mean for dyslexic employees, and how do you help?
So I think one of the most important things we need to think about in the workplace is how can we come from a strength-based approach. So you might think, oh my gosh, I've got 500 employees. That means at least 50 dyslexic. They've got all these challenges. What am I going to do? I can't cope. And we found with my research from the manager's perspective, they were saying to us, we can't cope. We already have to deal with mental health. We've already got complex other issues in our organisations where, chronic illness or a whole variety of things. And now you're telling us we've got this high percentage of dyslexics in our organisation. We don't want to, we're putting our hands up kind of thing. But what if we come from a strength-based approach where we know that every employee, dyslexic or not, brings a range of strengths, and that's how we should be working. And putting the tools in place so that those difficulties that anyone might be having, because we go up and down in our careers and we employ people and they're not 100%, we've got to upskill them into a role. But what we know is as AI comes in and we see more and more jobs transition into different ways, what we do know is dyslexics have a lot of strengths in those soft skills that employers are going to start looking for more and more. So emotional intelligence, that problem solving, the big picture thinking, those types of skills that we know AI can't do at the moment, and that we need to be leveraging more and more as we create these more inclusive workplaces. And to keep up with the pace of change, we need dyslexic thinkers and we need that difference of thought in an organisation.
Awesome. We're getting towards the end of our time here. So let's cover, and I know there's going to be a lot that we could cover, but first of all, let me ask, what is the name of your podcast again?
So we've got the Dear Dyslexic podcast, and that's on all platforms.
Okay, the Do Dyslexic, sorry.
Dear, D-E-A-R.
Oh,
so if you think of like Dear Diary or Dear John, so we called it that because we were diarising people's stories orally. So Dear Dyslexic.
Perfect. So wherever you may be getting your podcasts, look for Dear Dyslexic. So tell us a little bit about it. What are you doing on that podcast? What's different?
So we talk to everyday people that have dyslexia that are working. We've been talking a lot around the workplace and how we can build resilience and create support, what managers should be looking out for and how they can be supporting dyslexic staff or people in leadership roles. But really it's talking to everyday people that are succeeding, whether it's, being a mum and being able to read to your child, or we've had some famous people from America even on to talk, but really it's everyday people that want to share their story, because it's really about inspiring from the grassroots up.
That's awesome.
People.
That's an excellent resource. Thank you very much for that. And I know that you were thinking as you're preparing for today on things that you wanted to make sure that we covered. Is there anything that we haven't covered yet? This is your opportunity to say whatever you wish.
I think just ask the question, have some curiosity in your workplace. And if you're noticing some difficulties that I've discussed today, it's asking your managers or your leadership, how can we be supporting these individuals, or what could we be doing to make our workplace psychologically safe? Because if we don't feel safe, then we can't be at our best, and we can't contribute, and we can't meet workplace KPIs, and we can't meet our organisation's values. And so we need to start having these conversations of what does neurodivergence look like in our workplace. And if we start to unpack that, we might start to see more dyslexics coming out and feeling brave enough to share their stories and to share their struggles and to get the help that they're entitled to and that they deserve.
That's awesome. And if somebody wants to have a conversation with you, how do they find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn is probably the easiest, Shae Marie Wissell, or you can email me at shae.wissell@rethinkdyslexia.com.au, and we might be able to put that somewhere so people don't have to spell it, because I know I get emails wrong all the time and they bounce back.
So you're going to say it again to me. I got your Shae.Wissell at
rethinkdyslexia.com.au.
Okay. Don't put that.
Or just DM me through LinkedIn.
So is that
perfect?
Correct? Yay! So reach out to Shae. Hey, reach out to me. I will put you in contact with her. That's awesome. And boy, I just lost my train of thought on there. I apologize for that. So I think this has been fantastic. There's a lot more that we could be covering, I'm sure. Your nonprofit's name, is that also Rethink Dyslexia?
No, so our nonprofit is called Dear Dyslexic, which is the same as a podcast. That's pretty easy. Okay. And all the work we do there is around raising funds to pay for assessments and tutoring and other support for children through to adults.
Okay.
And the details are all on our website for that as well.
That's wonderful. And everyone go check it out, because this is, if you think, oh, we don't have any dyslexic employees, you heard what Shae said. It's statistically not possible. So you probably do. And there's a better way to support them and empower them and for greater success, because if they're achieving success, so is your business. So it's a really important thing to be paying attention to. Shae, thank you very much for being with us here today. I sincerely appreciate you getting up in the wee hours of the morning to chat with me. And I look forward to seeing your organization as it grows, and especially as it grows in the United States.
Thank you so much for having me on your show today, and I look forward to crawling back into bed. Yeah. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
I'm going to put you in the green room for a minute, but so don't hang up yet, okay? So, oops. Just hung up on her. Sorry, guys. So I want to thank you all for being here today and talking about this very important subject of dyslexia. We have all kinds of subjects that we are bringing to you every single week is something new, and it's not your normal what you think of as wellness. But if it has anything to do, if anything has anything to do with people at your organization, that's wellness. And so we're bringing you the topics. Check them out on our YouTube channel. Check them out on our website at youdefinewellness.com. And we hope to see you at another episode of the Humanistic Resources Show. Thanks, everyone. See you soon.